country. Hundreds of millions of pounds later, the highly bureaucratic first stage of the COVID report does exactly what it recommends we stop: enlarge government unnecessarily. Have we really learnt anything new from its findings? And another thumping victory for our own Nigel Farage. In the latest blow to the Islington glitterati, banks are ordered to stop debanking clients merely for holding political views that are out of step with Islington. We also examine why criminals seem to go virtually unpunished by the law. When will our streets become safer? We'll be finding out, and more. State of the Nation starts now. We're joined by my panel, Conservative peer and journalist Paul Goodman and Labour activist Susie Stride. As always, I want to know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com, but now it's your favourite part of the day, the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thanks very much indeed, and good evening to you. The top story from the GB newsroom tonight is that Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has announced £84 million worth of new funding to tackle illegal migration as he hosted the EU political summit at Blenheim Palace today. The Prime Minister says he wants to reset our relationship with Europe and push for closer security ties with other countries. The group agreed on boosting Ukraine's defence capabilities in the war against Russia. And speaking at the end of a summit of leaders, the Prime Minister promised to tackle Europe's migration crisis by smashing the gangs, he said, which continue to operate.
Stop illegal migration. We must also tackle it at source. So today I'm announcing £84 million of new funding for projects across Africa and the Middle East. That includes humanitarian and health support, skills training, help with job opportunities and access to education. This is a vital part of gripping the migration crisis. And it shows how we're going to do business on the world stage.
Well, that comes as the milestone of more than 15,000 small boat migrants have been counted crossing the English Channel so far this year. 315 illegal migrants were counted making the illegal journey today as calm sea conditions allowed more crossings. And it follows the death of one person last night and 71 others being rescued after a migrant boat sank in the English Channel late last night. All those on board the vessel ended up in the water, but were picked up in a joint rescue operation conducted between the UK and the French authorities. In other news today, Sir Keir Starmer says the report from the COVID inquiry confirms the UK was unprepared for the pandemic. In the 240-page assessment, Baroness Hallett found there were significant and widespread failures by successive governments. The report also condemned the 2011 pandemic strategy for being virtually abandoned when COVID hit, with no forward focus on economic and social impacts. Former Post Office Minister and now Lib Dem leader Ed Davey has said today that he was lied to about serious flaws in the Horizon IT system. Mr Davey told the inquiry today that the former Chief Executive, Paula Venables, and the former MD, David Smith, were the people passing the information to the government, he said, which was untrue. Between 1999 and 2015, hundreds of sub-postmasters were blamed and then prosecuted for losses caused by bugs in Fujitsu's faulty Horizon IT system. And let's just bring you a little bit more detail on that breaking news I brought to you an hour ago from Paris, where a police officer has been seriously injured after a man armed with a knife launched an attack in the city. It's being reported the attacker first ran through a shop next to the Champs-Élysées before being caught by the policeman who was attacked. The attacker then was reportedly shot by other police who were summoned to the scene, injuring him critically, and the area where that incident has taken place has now been cordoned off in Paris, the city on high alert tonight. Those are the latest news headlines for now. I'm Polly Middlehurst. I'm back in an hour with more. See you then.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Our bright-eyed and bushy-tailed new Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, made his debut in European diplomacy today, using an international summit at Blenheim Palace to address the continent's most pressing issue of illegal migration, as well as a bit of virtue signalling on climate change and energy policy. However, the Prime Minister always used his platform at the birthplace of Sir Winston Churchill to call for closer ties with the EU. Our famously Brexit-phobic head of government made his case for a, quote, reset post-Brexit, declaring, under my leadership, Britain will be a friend and a partner, ready to work with you, not part of the European Union, but very much part of Europe. Arch Remainer Sir Keir is by his own reckoning seeking to distance himself from the previous Conservative government's approach to European relations, such as dismantling the possibility of withdrawing from human rights agreements. However, when considering the vague, non-committal term reset in the context of the Prime Minister's own record on European affairs, while he specifies not part of the European Union, but very much part of Europe, it is clear that he is returning Britain into EU jurisdiction through a combination of stealth and domestic measures. Keir Starmer's historic record as shadow Brexit secretary under Jeremy Corbyn, whom he has served but subsequently expelled from the Labour Party, displayed a wish to reverse Brexit. He was even committed to a second referendum. Writing for the Evening Standard during the 2019 general election campaign, he said, "In the first Queen's speech of a Labour government, we will immediately introduce legislation for a referendum to take place. That referendum will take place as soon as possible and no later than 6 months from a Labour government taking office." This may be old hat, but today his newly appointed Minister for European Union Relations, Nick Thomas-Symonds, said Brexit tarnished the UK's global reputation and that the UK is turning inwards when actually Britain should always be turning outwards to the world. And just this week, Starmer took a stealthier approach to bring us back under the European yoke. The Economist's Matthew Holhouse highlighted the explanation of some legislation from yesterday's King's speech which would allow ministers unilaterally to mirror future EU product standards. Watch out for your smoky bacon crisps. This is partly because of the Windsor Framework, and it already sees this happening in Northern Ireland, where EU law comes into effect automatically. This, in effect, reverses the post-Brexit powers of regulating our own goods for our own consumption and would allow any future regulation set by the EU, which we have no say in determining, effectively to be adopted by default and with minimal scrutiny. It's further evidence that the blob is still in charge. The scenes from the Commons yesterday of Rishi Sunak and Oliver Dowding laughing away with Sir Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner on the way to hear the King's speech was a visual representation of the minimal difference between the old administration and the new. The Starmer effort simply seeks to enable their progressive leftist agenda further. The British people did not vote to leave the EU so that ministers could streamline EU regulations into statute with minimal scrutiny from elected MPs. Indeed, in His Majesty's new Labour government, our main representative on the world stage, Mr David Lammy, tried to subvert the will of the British people before the process had even begun. He urged Parliament to reject the result of the referendum, stating the result was advisory and attempting to move the goalposts just because he didn't like the outcome.
Last week's referendum was an advisory referendum, given, frankly, that we had a referendum that should have been a two-thirds majority for such a constitutional change. And I'm very clear, I will not vote for Brexit in this country on behalf of my constituents and let down the young people of Britain. I won't do it.
With our two primary spokesmen on the world stage having a long history of wanting to delegitimise the result of the EU referendum, it's crucial that Brexiteers in the House of Commons and outside do not allow Keir Starmer to take Britain back into the EU via the gradual cessation of powers and resubjection to European regulations. Brexit was too hard fought to be relinquished through the back door. As ever, let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now I've got my most intellectual panel, the Conservative peer and journalist Paul Goodman and Labour activist Susie Stride. Susie, let me come to you first, because this bit in the King's speech wasn't particularly noticed until Matthew Holhouse pointed out that Labour wants to legislate to fast-track EU regulations onto the UK statute book. That's exactly what we repealed when we got rid of the 1972 European Communities Act. This is putting Europe back in the driving seat for British law.
I mean, my view of all of this is it makes sense that Keir Starmer, our new Prime Minister, would want to build a good friendship with Europe, would want to reset that relationship, and I think that's a positive thing. And I feel like there's a lot of fear around this, and I'm not sure if it needs to be there. I don't think we're going backwards. I don't think we're going to go back, you know, to another referendum. Like, these things aren't happening. I mean, that clip from David Lammy, that's 2016. We've moved on. And I think it's important, it's really important to say this. Good leaders change their minds, and that's OK. And that's clearly what Keir Starmer's had to do on this issue. He's listened to the British public and he's moved on.
I doubt we'll formally rejoin. And yes, I quoted something from 2016 and one from 2019. But the Europe Minister has said today that Brexit had damaged our reputation abroad. And Sir Keir Starmer has brought forward in the King's speech something that will fast-track EU regulations. And one of the reasons we voted to leave was that people hated the bureaucracy of Brussels being imposed on them without any democratic say. And so this seems a really bad step back to tagging to Europe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just not sure if we're inflating some of what's going on here. Look, ultimately, it's not a black and white issue, is it? Like, lots of people wanted to leave, lots of people wanted to stay. There are some benefits for us not being in the EU, and obviously, if you voted to leave, you look at the benefits. But we have to be honest here, it wasn't good for our reputation in some parts of how the world see us. And
well, Europe was cross, but that was inevitable.
I don't know if just Europe was cross. I think, look, we don't ever want to be... people say this about America, don't they, that they can be very, inward-looking. Now, don't get me wrong, there are positives to being inward-looking. I am from a working-class background, and I'm sometimes like, this is the thing about J.D. Vance, and, I've just watched his movie on Netflix. Fascinating man, really fascinating, come from great struggle, great poverty, and, he keeps mentioning his home, doesn't he? He's so proud of his home and he cares. And I understand that thing of, we do need to look after, our homes, and we do need to invest, in this country. But at the same time, I think we do need to recognise there was damage done, and, anything we can do to offset that damage. Even an Oxford professor, very interesting, because I always liked when I studied at Cambridge, and I'm always like, what are these professors saying? Because they hopefully don't have agendas, they're not politicians. And this guy was like, it has been massively damaging. And so I just think, look, I'm not arguing one way or the other, but what I would say is, I think it's OK to recognise there has been some damage to reputation. There are positives, there are negatives. Let's do what we can to rebuild the good, is what I would say.
Paul, let me bring you on this, because it seems to me, actually, the last Conservative government paved the way for this, that the Windsor Framework is allowing Labour now to say that we need to follow EU regulations in Great Britain because otherwise we'll diverge from Northern Ireland. This is said in the notes to the King's speech, and that will upset the internal market.
I am completely baffled by this conversation. Susie's just referred quite properly to what's happening in the United States. So you have a president and a vice president who may go cold on NATO. The United States is increasingly looking to China rather than to Europe. So I think it's a really good thing for the British Prime Minister. Remember, this summit was arranged under a Conservative government to be meeting with European leaders to discuss the future and, in particular, defence and security at a moment when Russia may be doing rather better in the war in Ukraine. Brexit, that's a different and very, very important matter. But I'm worried here we're missing the big picture, and that there are details in that picture that matter a bit more than smoky bacon crisps.
Oh, well, the issue there is NATO, surely, that the bulwark of defence in Europe is NATO, and that we
may not have NATO in its current form if the United States continues on its present trajectory. Therefore, it's very important for our leaders to talk to European leaders about security.
That's not serious. Without the US, there is no defence of Europe. There's no time.
Right. In which case, as someone would say in Dad's Army, we're all doomed. But I think other European countries, and the Americans are quite right about this, ought to be thinking about putting more into their defence budgets.
Of course they should. And Trump actually was very successful in getting them to do this by his big stick approach to NATO. But if you think that the European Union and the UK can get to a sufficient level of military power...
I didn't mention the European Union. I was thinking about our European partners, in particular the French, the only other serious military power in Europe, and the Germans, who are not pulling their weight and have not been pulling their weight since 1945.
But they can't pull their weight in 6 months. And what's going on in Ukraine is going on now. So actually, in this context,
I think the summit's about a bit more than the next 6 months. We ought to be meeting with other European leaders to discuss last the next 6 years.
Well, and the next 60 years, and NATO's last 75
so
years.
I'm not at all cool about this summit. I think that regardless of what you think about Brexit, I'm a paid-up Brexiteer as you are, it's a very good thing for European leaders to be sitting around talking about and planning for our security.
That's all fine without us returning to the European Union. What I was saying was, if you look at what Starmer has said, and if you look at the King's speech, they're preparing the way for us being an associate of the European Union.
It's true, I suppose, that any government could take that kind of action, whether it's a Conservative government or a Labour government. I was just trying to pan the camera out a bit, because I think there's much more to what's happening
that's an important
than simply the matter of
different
Brexit.
discussion, because Brexit remains important to get the opportunities from it, rather than sacrifices.
Yeah, but I think the thing is look, I just think it's really important that the British public understand. You know, it's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, I went to Blenheim Palace just a few months ago. Incredible place. I didn't realise that Winston Churchill was born there. But, you know, we have a great heritage in this country, don't we, of standing up to evil and, you know, of actually turning the tide of history. And I just think, you know, it is important, isn't it? I think we need to not look back. I think we need to not look inward. I think we need to not look too, like, obsessively over certain details. And I think it's really important what you're saying. We need to think about the world stage. We need to think about, like, what's going on in Ukraine. We need to think about Russia and all these other globe geopolitics that are going on. And it is important that we do have a good relationship with our nearest neighbour. And obviously it's really important that we do everything in our power to keep America in a good place.
Thank you very much. And Susie very helpfully alluded to the fact that it's at Blenheim, which was, of course, built to celebrate stopping France dominating Europe. So thanks to both Paul and Susie. Coming up, a further look into the questionable rhetoric of David Lammy, our new Foreign Secretary. Is he the right man to be representing the United Kingdom abroad? Plus, the COVID inquiry's new report is released. It may have been critical, but would it have been far more so had Labour been in charge? Find out why after the break.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Now, we've got a story and a half to tell you and bring you now. Our very own GB News political correspondent, who we love very much, Catherine Foster, joins us in the studio, and she's smiling, but she wasn't smiling for the past few days.
Two of her sons, Matthew and Andrew, were reported missing in Bali.
I got a text from a friend saying, can you give us a call, a bit worried about them. Then spoke to a girl they'd befriended who was in Sweden, but they'd met on their travels. And she told me that they'd gone up the mountain. By the time I found out, they'd been missing for 30 hours. They'd gone up the mountain on the Tuesday night, British time. This was the Thursday morning, without a guide. And they'd told her it was really hard. And she told them to turn back, but they hadn't. And they'd sent screenshots from this app with this trail that they were following on the app, screenshots of the app in case there was a problem, and a Snapchat of a Matthew avatar at the top. And she said, I know they made it to the top because I could see that his phone had nearly died. But the trail had actually closed many years ago. So the app, we will need to make sure that that gets taken off the app. But, you know, technology saved them in the end because it was the screenshots and it was the messages that they'd sent, but they should never have been without a guide.
But what were you doing during those 30 hours that Mum couldn't, when the phone died and Mum couldn't get in touch? Where were you? What were you up to?
Well, we were trying to figure out the best course of action, because it started to pour with rain. The amount of rain created a river, like a stream.
Yeah.
We were like, let's follow the stream downhill, and then the sun set, and we just had to, like, sleep in the bushes in the jungle.
GB News, the People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, we've been talking about Sir Keir Starmer and Brexit, and your views have been coming in. Rod says, could someone remind David Lammy that the people of the UK never had a referendum on joining the then EEC in 1973, but were asked in 1975 if we wished to remain in the community? Such a handover of sovereignty in joining the EEC deserved asking the will of the people. And Bryce says, hi, Jacob. Just to let you know that the weather in Somerset this evening is beautiful, sunny and warm, with a light, cool breeze wafting about. Well, I shall be heading down shortly after this programme ends. I'll be on the M4 and getting home before the evening's over. So thank you for that. So important, stronger than ever. These are the phrases used by the Prime Minister recently to describe how vital the US-UK relationship is to global security. Seems peculiar, then, that he appointed David Lammy as the UK's most senior representative on foreign affairs. Mr. Lammy has described Trump, the man most likely to be the next US president, as a neo-Nazi sympathising sociopath. When asked this morning whether he regretted this and similar comments, he stated, Trump has the thickest of skins. This is also the man who described the 2016 referendum as advisory and called for the result to be ignored. And it may only be fair to remind viewers that the Nazi epithet is a personal favourite of Lammy's. He once compared me to the Nazis and later stated that the reference was not strong enough. Perhaps it ought to be a new verb. When anyone is compared to the Nazis, they can be described as being lammied. But is he really the right man to be shouldering the burden of international relations? Well, I'm joined now by the co-founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bustani. Aaron, thank you so much for coming in.
My pleasure, Jacob.
All politicians have said things that they later regret. And sometimes we fall back on that hoary old chestnut and say we were quoted out of context, which is usually code for saying we've said something we regretted. Or occasionally we say we regret saying it. There's a wonderful quotation from Churchill about how he'd often had to eat his own words and he'd found it a very sustaining diet. David Lammy this morning would not say that he regretted any of these comments about Trump. Is that right for the Foreign Secretary?
It's a very strange situation. I mean, just responding to what you said a moment ago, many people regret things they've said about Donald Trump, including his now running mate, VP, J.D. Vance. Although he gave a very good explanation as to why he said the things he said. He said elite liberals and elite conservatives bought into the image rather than the substance of his agenda. Lammy's saying what he said, I think, says a few things. Firstly, he never thought he'd be in this position, clearly. He never thought he was going to be on the front bench of politics anytime soon, because, of course, at the time the leader was Jeremy Corbyn. And then secondly, you know, look, it's OK for a toe rag like me to say something like that, because I'm not seeking public office, a great office of state. I'm on the sidelines, regardless of one's views on these things. But I do think a foreign secretary being that injudicious about the leaders and potential leaders of overseas powers, particularly allies, is probably unwise. And I'm sure David Lammy now thinks that. The big problem for him, of course, is that Trump could become the president. Right now, it's all speculative, but the minute Trump is president, this will be quite hard.
And that seems to be important because David Lammy said that Trump is thick-skinned. Well, the one thing we know about Donald Trump is that he isn't very thick-skinned, that he doesn't like being criticised, and he responds sometimes very aggressively to his critics. And yet it is our most important foreign affairs relationship.
Yeah, Donald Trump likes to hold a grudge. I mean, that's pretty clear.
He enjoys it. It's part of his political approach.
Well, the interesting thing, actually, is to hold in counterpoint David Lammy to Keir Starmer. Now, I suspect you don't have much time for the politics of Keir Starmer either, but he would never... He tends not to name call, you know, and if people try and pin him down on something, he doesn't sort of acquiesce to labels and to, you know, generalisations. He's quite a thoughtful man, which, by the way, I think is an argument for more people entering politics a little bit later in life. You know, he got involved in politics in his mid-50s. He's quite calm, he's quite judicious. In calling Trump what he did at the time, that wasn't what Lammy was doing.
And I think that's absolutely right, that I have occasionally slipped into personal attacks, and I've always regretted them. They're a very bad form of politics. But if you make them, surely it's wise just to apologise. Because I was listening to Lammy with Martha Carney on Radio 4 this morning, and Martha Carney's farewell interview on the Today programme, which was a great pity, because I haven't been an admirer of hers, but nonetheless it was. And she gave him several opportunities to say, look, I said that then, I deeply regret it, I'm now Foreign Secretary, I apologise to Mr Trump. which is what I would have said if I'd been him, that you want to wipe the slate as clean as possible. But he absolutely wouldn't. He used the sort of cheap politicians' tricks of not answering the question. I think he even said, "Let me be absolutely clear," which means a politician is about to say something that isn't at all clear. And I just don't get that. He's not a stupid man, and it would make the relationship in the national interest much easier if he swallowed his pride and apologised.
So somebody might be watching this and think that you're trying to, pull the thread and upset the apple cart, but you're absolutely right to say this is a hugely important relationship economically, politically, militarily. The Trident submarine system does not work without the Americans. They service various parts of that system. And Donald Trump is not like most other political figures. He does, hold a grudge, and he can be often quite disproportionate with his responses to things. So a foreign minister saying this about him, you might think, well, he's entitled to his view, etc. That's perfectly legitimate, of course. Donald Trump, like I say, isn't necessarily the most reasonable person, given he may be the head of state of the most powerful country in the world, but also a very key ally for the UK. This is not to be hyperbolic. This could have genuinely large implications for the UK. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's true.
And as you point out, stylistically, it's so unlike Keir Starmer. So will there be pressure coming from within the Labour Party? I mean, when Alastair Campbell was head of communications, a minister who'd said something like this about an American president would be getting an order to apologise.
Yes.
And if he hadn't apologised within a couple of hours, something pretty drastic would happen.
Yeah.
Is the Starmer regime controlling enough to do this, or can David Lammy just get away with it?
I suspect they absolutely are. I'm surprised it hasn't happened already, frankly. And I suspect that he will be given some kind of ultimatum, either apologise. It doesn't need to be, you don't have to be obsequious to Mr. Trump, but, you need to apologise.
And make it clear. Because, as you say, this relationship is so important. And we were discussing previously America looking to China, less interested in Europe, even talking about changes in its relationship with Taiwan. It's got very focused on America's interest and money. And we need America to be strong. The idea that European states can defend against Russia on their own is for the birds. And this is the most important American relationship with the European state. So David Lammy is very important in this.
Well, I think maybe we disagree on this because I think the Europeans should be able to look after themselves. It's something that J.D. Vance said, and I agreed with him. He said, look, these are large, productive economies. Why on earth can't they shoulder their own defence burden, which is a fair point.
But you can't do it in 6 months. To build up defence takes years.
No, of course not.
And therefore, yes, of course we should, but we can't do it. We need the American umbrella for the immediate future.
Although, of course, in the case of Mr. Trump, we might not have it. And this is interesting. People like Jeremy Corbyn or critics of NATO, let's say, have been pilloried and mocked as, allies of Putin, friends of Russia, our enemies, etc. But it's a very real question that policy elites in this country have not engaged with, the possibility of the United States walking away from the Western alliance.
Indeed. Well, Aaron, thank you very much indeed. Coming up, we look at the expensive new COVID inquiry and whether it was really necessary. And after that, Nigel Farage scores another win over the woke establishment. And we reveal the shocking state of Britain's law and order.
Hello, very good evening to you. Here's your latest GB News weather update coming to you from the Met Office. There could be some heavy, possibly even thundery rain this weekend, but before then, a lot of fine and hot weather around. That being said, there is a weather system affecting parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland through the end of today, bringing a bit more cloud and some outbreaks of rain here, though the rain will be easing overnight, so turning mostly dry. Meanwhile, across the bulk of England and Wales, it's a dry night with largely clear skies, albeit a few pockets of fog, a bit more cloud perhaps towards western parts. Temperatures not dropping a huge amount, a bit difficult for sleeping for some of us, some places holding up in the high teens Celsius, though a little bit cooler towards the northwest. And then tomorrow, it is going to be a hot day for many of us, particularly in the south. And starting off looking first thing, a fine picture, lots of sunshine through the morning. And once the sun comes up, those temperatures will quickly start to rise. A bit further north, it's looking cloudier, not as cloudy as today. And there may be a bit of rain around over higher ground, but on the whole, it's a dry start to the day as well. There may even be some sunshine breaking through, particularly towards the Moray coast and northern parts of Aberdeenshire as well. well. But as we go through the day, I'm expecting a bit of rain to start to push its way in towards the Outer Hebrides and some blustery winds developing here. Elsewhere, largely dry, 1 or 2 showers perhaps, but the general theme will be that there's plenty of sunshine around, especially across England and Wales. And with that, even hotter than today, temperatures rising into the low 30s Celsius towards the southeast and the mid to high 20s across many other areas. Some further wet weather then is going to push its way in across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland as we go into Saturday. Perhaps some of that rain reaching into western parts of England and Wales as well. Further east, it's staying drier, and here we should still have some hot weather for a time, but there is the potential for some thunderstorms to develop on Saturday night. Then Sunday's looking a bit changeable, with things turning cooler by next week.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Well, I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we've been talking about David Lammy, and the Mail Moggs have been zooming in. Roger says, no, David Lammy is not the best man to be Foreign Secretary, and Dave says, I assume this isn't Dave Cameron, it'd be funny if it were, David Lammy is not fit to represent the country in any way whatsoever. He displays both ignorance and arrogance, qualities which will lead to misunderstanding and conflict before very long. Well, COVID-19 was unquestionably a crisis for the country, and the cure turned out to be as bad as the disease, with COVID taking great toll upon all people, particularly through the lockdown, the younger generation. The mistakes made are clear and well known, many of which were brought about by ill-preparedness for an unknown disease. It's therefore quite unnecessary, it seems to me, to have commissioned an enormously expensive COVID inquiry that could cost the taxpayer £200 million. Baroness Hallett's report tells us little we didn't know already, other than we should cry over spilt milk, which is not usually a beneficial activity. That the misallocating of government resources to pontificate over past events doesn't really help. The state needs to trim its fat and crack on with the real problems facing this country. Well, to discuss this is my most intellectual panel, the Conservative peer and journalist, Paul Goodman, and the Labour activist, Susie Stride. Paul, £200 million to tell us that the Cabinet Office should be put in charge of emergencies doesn't seem to me to be a very good use of money.
Your former colleague, David Davis, suggested that we should follow the example of Sweden, which had a brief inquiry into lessons learned all over pretty swiftly. And then if we want to, we can have the traditional kind of British inquiry where we just put all the politicians on trial, whether it's Blair on Iraq or now Boris Johnson on COVID, and we can throw mud at them and condemn them and all the rest of it. And I'm sure we were very badly prepared for COVID. So it appears with most countries in Europe. In the end, we ended up in the middle of the pack. And I'm fascinated by how, in the wake of COVID, not Brexit, but COVID, most governments, if you accept, I think, Spain, Canada and France for the moment, most governments have been thrown out. Poland, Italy, Germany, America, New Zealand, Australia.
And Canada was quite lucky because of the timing of its election, and Canada
was lucky. Macron has now been upended. That just leaves Spain. And I think, thinking about the recent general election, it really seemed to me COVID was a much bigger factor in the result than Brexit was.
We might come back to that, but Susie, I just want to ask you, what is the point of saying you weren't prepared for something that nobody knew about? That COVID was a disease that had never come up before. It was different from the flus for which we were prepared. No country, as far as I'm aware, was actually prepared for COVID. The totalitarian regimes just shut everything down. Well, that's what they can do. But none of the democracies were able to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of agree. It's like, it was hard to prepare. We'd never seen anything like this, in I don't know how many 100 years. I think there was a great pity that we were so extreme on the lockdowns, because I think the toll on mental health, the toll on those that didn't get NHS treatment, the toll on education, all these things. And I kind of feel that there was, I don't know if it was a lack of common sense, actually, in the room. And I've read these recommendations, and I think these are good recommendations. I also would agree, I'm not sure, do we need to spend this amount of money? I just wonder, like you're saying, if other countries have done, a slightly more scaled back, you'd possibly get the exact same findings, the exact same recommendations, the exact same change, but for far less money. And let's invest that money in something else.
But the recommendations are all very well in an ideal world. But I was a minister at the time, and I was peripheral to it. I was leader of the House, so I can't claim I was intimately involved. But when the experts came on, they told us we would kill people. Now, however much you have a red challenge and you have another group and you have outside thinking, when you're sitting there as a minister and Chris Whitty says, if you do this, people will die, you don't say, oh, well, actually, my mate in the pub is challenging this and says that you're protected if you bathe in Domestos or whatever, that thing, or Dettol or whatever it was.
Actually, we do know, in retrospect, that not for the first lockdown, but then afterwards, there were tremendous debates in the government about this, very often reflecting the views of the departments. So the Treasury was going in, arguing that the lockdowns were too extensive and causing damage to the economy. Meanwhile, the experts in the Department of Health, who ended up having an interest in locking down, wanted to lock down more.
More and more. And I remember very clearly, and it's been leaked, if I can repeat it, the cabinet meeting that decided not to lock down before Christmas, we were told specifically that we were just believing all the good information, and if you just believe all the good information, people die. Unfortunately, we went ahead and didn't lock down, and it turned out that we were justified. But that was a very brave decision to take against officials giving you these dire warnings.
Yes, it was. And Boris Johnson made a mass of mistakes in government, but that was quite a brave call, for which, of course, he will get no thanks whatsoever.
And it's interesting, your point, that actually, although the opinion polls showed everyone loved being locked down, they didn't really, did they, Susie?
Oh, well, I mean, when we say lockdown, there were distinct
stages,
lockdowns,
yes.
Wasn't there? There was the first lockdown, it was really sunny and people went out walking and it was like, oh, that one was quite pleasant. There was a second lockdown, which again was a little bit more... I think that third one, which was kind of the January, and it was, I just think by that point, it was depressing. And look, ultimately, people did die not from COVID. I actually lost a 30-year-old friend from heart failure, and he did not get the help he needed. And that's replicated how many times over. And I just think, for me, and I hear what you're saying about like this team and that team, but actually, I think you do need challenge in the room, because obviously, like you said, those health experts were saying people are going to die, and people maybe were going to die, but you've got to have the right challenge there, and obviously that wasn't there, and people were scared, ministers were scared, and they just towed some sort of line.
Well, excellent. We must move on. The red flag won't be kept flying in Coventry after Amazon workers in the city rejected a landmark deal to form a trade union. Well done. Only 49.5% of workers were in favour of a proposal put forward by the GMB union, which has now pledged to launch a legal challenge against the result. GMB, the General Municipal and Boilermakers Union, I think, said that Amazon was guilty of union-busting activities, which they describe as bosses targeting workers with anti-union messaging, with the Telegraph reporting that the union also plans to lobby the Labour government, of course, over the result. Is it now time to ask why socialists hate democracy so much? The Amazon workers have voted, and they don't want to be a union. They want to carry on working for Amazon and trust their employers. And employers and employees have a much better relationship than perhaps in Victorian factories.
Look, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't work in an Amazon factory, but I think there probably are good reasons why those workers did want to join GMB. What I'm concerned about is I don't know what the tactics are that they use, because obviously I'm not one of the workers there. But I am a member of the GMB. I do believe in trade unions. Look, my mum used to work in supermarkets back in the 80s, and one supermarket didn't look after her. Bless her, she had a miscarriage because she wasn't looked after properly by her employer. And then later she worked for Asda. she was looked after by Asda. But I always just think, man, if she knew about trade unions, if she understood. Now, I hear what you're saying. It's like everything in life. There is a side to some trade unions which is not good, and it's not good for the economy, and it's actually not good for workers. But there is a side of trade unions which are really, really important. And I don't know enough about this situation, but I would be very, very concerned if actually there was an absolute dominance of and barrage of negativity about trade unions to those workers, because ultimately we live in a country where people have a right to join a trade union.
I mean, actually, I think we're going to have a degree of agreement on this. I think there is a place for trade unions, and they can help workers against a very powerful boss. But the idea of bosses against workers is an outdated one, that most employers actually want to see their employees flourish.
Well, we're about to find out, because one thing that the government clearly is going to do is rebalance labour law. We're going to find out the degree to which modern cooperation really works, or if we go back to the bad old days, and I suppose that's in the balance, and we'll have to see.
Well, and there are issues then about employing people if they have rights from day one, and will even be able to work from home from day one, which isn't very helpful if you're working in an Amazon warehouse, is it? I can't see how you work from home there.
Well, rather like Susie, I just don't know enough about this situation. It is, of course, a statement of the obvious to say you can't work in an Amazon warehouse from home.
Indeed.
But I do just want to say, as I said, I know the GMB trade union really well. They have helped me in my life. They have, if you join the GMB, you get a free legal advice. Right. You know, and again, for someone, I don't have a legal friend, and so like that for me. And I think there are lots of really positive things, and they're not all like these crazy militant people. They're good people. They're quite, centred down the road people.
All right, we're going to have to move on. Unfortunately, my panel is so brilliant, they want to carry on talking. Anyway, coming up, another thumping victory for the great Nigel Farage in the latest blow to the Islington glitterati. Banks ordered to stop debanking clients merely for holding political views that are out of step with the people of Islington. Poor old Islington.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
Now, the last time we spoke, we always talk about the topic of gender and your transition. So talk to me about now, though. What you've done is you've created a comic book about your life and about your transition to tell us things that perhaps the press and media don't talk about.
Yes, so throughout the years I have always been persuaded to write a book, but I was never ready to disclose so much. And I've been working this beautiful comic book. I brought you a little copy. It's here. You can have a look into it later, where I'm detailing past experiences, growing up in Brazil and then moving to this country, and my struggles, the struggles that I had to go through to become the woman that I'm today. I'm a woman. I'm not a biological woman, but I am a woman. I just cannot have babies because I don't have the female organs, but I'm a woman inside out, therefore I use the female toilet. But what has been going on around, there are a lot of people, they regard themselves as being transgender when they're actually not. They don't have any psychological help, they don't have any medical help. They just wear female clothes and makeup and they call themselves female. And they're the ones using female spaces and take advantage of that. And that is what should stop and be controlled.
But that's the problem, isn't it? So what do you do to stop that? I mean, the suggestion was a third extra space. How would you feel about a third extra space where, this is where if somebody is trans or any of those other things can use rather than using the female toilet?
I don't think that would work, actually, because these people that those people that regard themselves as being females in their minds, they still would use the female toilet.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Go and get another glass of that bubbly, you've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, we've been talking about the COVID inquiry and what the Rees-Moggs have to say. Steve makes the very good point. Sweden didn't lock down. It was governmental overreach. And Alan heard nothing from Starmer about a policy to design, produce, store and distribute plans for another possible pandemic. Perhaps we'll have a review first. Well, reviews are popular. There's been a further victory for Nigel Farage over the debanking scandal. The FCA has warned the country's biggest banks to treat customers who are politicians as well as their families more fairly and not to discriminate against them owing to their status as politically exposed persons. It is further proof of Farage's vindication and that he should be commended for drawing attention to this issue. At the time, the government promised a law to make it harder to debank, which received cross-party support and had its statutory instrument drafted. The snap election disrupted this. It is now important that the new government acts to continue the process and to see the right to be free from banks' political discrimination enshrined in law. Well, with me now is the General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, Mr. Toby Young. Toby, it was very good to have a leading trade unionist or free speech unionist with us. How big a victory is this, and is the FCA's decision important?
It is important, Jacob, and we should certainly welcome it. The FCA, about 6 months ago, decided that actually debanking wasn't happening, and they didn't need to do anything about it. They haven't exactly done a U-turn, but this is specifically about politically exposed persons. That is politicians, would-be politicians, members of politicians' families. So there was one extraordinary incident in which Lord Forsyth, the Conservative politician, his daughter was told by Coots to find another bank just because she was his daughter. She was the daughter of a politically exposed person. So the Financial Conduct Authority has said banks have to treat politically exposed persons more fairly. And that's great news. But we also want them to treat everyone else more fairly too, and to stop debanking people, whether they're politically prominent or not, because they disapprove of their political views. And as you say, we need to bring pressure now on the current Labour government to make good on what the last government promised to do, which was to amend the payment services regulations to make debanking of ordinary people more difficult.
And do you think that's going to happen? Have you heard anything from your sources within the Labour Party that they might be pushing ahead with this, or will they put it on the back burner?
Well, the Free Speech Union is going to write to Tulip Sadiq, who is the economic secretary to the Treasury and the City Minister. It's very much a matter for her. And the Treasury were on side. We had some very productive conversations with her Conservative counterpart, Andrew Griffith, and the Treasury had drafted the statutory instrument necessary to amend the payment services regulations, and were about to lay that statutory instrument when Rishi Sunak called the snap election. So
but the opposition has come from the Home Office, hasn't it, which always wants to take every possible power to the state and have it as unaccountable as possible. So the Treasury was very good on this, but the Home Office was pretty dreadful.
I think that's right, Jacob. And I guess it will partly depend on whether the Treasury can prevail over the Home Office on this particular issue under Labour. Ultimately, it's probably a decision that will be made by number 10 Downing Street. But as you said in your introduction, the measure did have cross-party support. It's not a partisan issue. Labour, people with left-wing views have been debanked, just as people with right-wing views have been debanked.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your nice piece in The Spectator about me and the Rees-Mogg family generally today. The Financial Conduct Authority's Executive Director of Markets and International, Sarah Pritchard, said public service naturally comes with greater scrutiny, but it must be proportionate and shouldn't disadvantage people running for office. That requires a balancing act. We're following up with those firms that we're getting the balance wrong to ensure they make changes. Gosh, these official statements are so wonderfully bureaucratic. Is there any surprise that crime is rising throughout the country when so many in the justice system seem to be opposed to doing anything about it? Yesterday, 2 asylum seekers who stole a watch worth £25,000 from a man in the street walked free. Both admitted to the robbery, but were given community orders rather than sent to jail. Meanwhile, alcohol in Tesco's has been placed behind a protective 4-step security device to prevent shoplifters. Police officers stationed at shop entrances have also become a common sight. Why is this happening? Surely it's time to get a grip on law and order. Now, I fear Labour will prioritise abstract ideological ambitions, such as the removal of hereditary peerages, rather than keeping Britons safe. Susie, what is wrong with our judges that when people admit stealing £25,000, they don't find they're both going to jail, and if they're here illegally, they're then deported?
I mean, I just don't know enough about that case to know why that has happened, but when we think about crime in this country, you're right, it is a massive problem. I think there are some really obvious things that we can be doing and also that Labour have committed to doing. So things like, you know, increasing the number of police on our streets, but also things like investing in youth services, you know, making sure post-16 education, apprenticeships, youth employment, all these things, they seem like soft approaches. They're not soft approaches. You know, I can't remember what the percentages are, but it's a whole chunk of crime is actually a lot of it is youth crime, isn't it? And a lot of it's kind of like antisocial behaviour, and a lot of that can be dealt with, I think, when you have good things in the community, like youth clubs, like community centres, like apprenticeships, you know, that young people have hope, so they're not doing, you know, silly other things.
Well, how much blame do you think we should take for this? Because we talked a tough game on crime, but did we really deliver in 14 years?
I was struck by an aspect of the general election campaign, which is that there were debates about all manner of things, but unless I'm wrong, the debate about crime and law and order didn't take off at all, and I'm wondering why that was. Is it just because the media won't report it and take it for granted, or is it because, as governments tend to claim, lots of forms of crime have fallen? Now, among the sort that clearly are not fallen, and there's a lot of concern about it, it really does seem to be happening, is this stuff in supermarkets. Yeah. It really does seem to be a real and growing problem. I don't know if part of the answer, as with the item you were presenting, is you can somehow design it out in the same way that we appear to have designed out breakouts from prisons.
And designed out, I mean, I remember when I was a teenager, the thing that was always happening was cars were being stolen. Do you remember joyriding? You're broadly similar age. And that has been designed out. Cars are hard to get into.
One big problem about this, which, you know, Labour will also have to face, is the kind of stark background, which is we are spending an increasing amount of public spending on health and pensions. Everything else gets squeezed, hence the crisis in the prisons. And we can't have a tough Michael Howard-type law and order policy without building more prison places. You have to have one or the other.
Though we may, if we can get planning right, which is the most exciting thing Labour are proposing, because under our current planning system, each new prison cell costs a whopping £600,000.
Yeah.
Which just seems...
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why that is again. Like, I don't have enough, you know, intelligence on, like, why it costs that much to build a cell. But I do just want to say this. I think it's really important to have hope in this area. Because you can bring crime down. You can.
Absolutely.
You know,
hope springs eternal. Thank you very much to my panel. Supporters at the Republican National Convention have begun to sport ear bandages similar to the one worn by Donald Trump after he was shot. The phenomenon appears certain to have become the latest fashion trend. Back in the UK, we know a few famous faces who could enjoy jumping on the latest craze too. For example, the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, they were keen to drop to their knees with delight during the 2020 Black Lives Matter protest. So we thought they soon might hop on the ear bandage bandwagon. In the meantime, here's a quick preview. Van Gogh, of course, started this fashion some years ago. I fully expect Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner to be rocking them, wearing them in the Commons next week in a show of solidarity with President Trump. Perhaps we may even see the Foreign Secretary joining them. Anyway, up next, it's Patrick Christie's. Patrick, what is on the bill of fare this evening?
Yeah, loads on, actually. In fact, there is an ongoing riot, really, in Leeds. Footage of that incident is emerging. I'll bring an update on that for you. I'm also going to ask if Labour is about to permanently move asylum seekers into their new housing developments all around the country. And talking of asylum seekers, one guy managed to get off community service because he can't speak English. And Extinction Rebellion, though, they've not been so lucky. Some of them have been handed lengthy prison sentences. There is a heck of a lot on tonight, Jacob, but that ongoing riot in Leeds will be a good one to get us going, I think.
Well, I will definitely be listening to you on the wireless as I drive down to Somerset, which is where I'm going to next, because I'm going to be telling about the weather, and the weather is going to be absolutely glorious in Somerset. A weekend of sunshine, and we're a bit late, but I think we may be bottling the cider, because I wasn't there on St Swithin's Day. Anyway, for now, I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. I much look forward to seeing you all on Monday.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good evening to you. Here's your latest GB News weather update coming to you from the Met Office. There could be some heavy, possibly even thundery rain this weekend, but before then, a lot of fine and hot weather around. That being said, there is a weather system affecting parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland through the end of today, bringing a bit more cloud and some outbreaks of rain here, though the rain will be easing overnight, so turning mostly dry. Meanwhile, across the bulk of England and Wales, it's a dry night with largely clear skies, albeit a few pockets of fog. A bit more cloud perhaps towards western parts. Temperatures not dropping a huge amount, a bit difficult for sleeping for some of us, some places holding up in the high teens Celsius, though a little bit cooler towards the northwest. And then tomorrow, it is going to be a hot day for many of us, particularly in the south. And starting off looking first thing, a fine picture, lots of sunshine through the morning. And once the sun comes up, those temperatures will quickly start to rise. A bit further north, it's looking cloudier, not as cloudy as today. And there may be a bit of rain around over higher ground, but on the whole, it's a dry start to the day as well. There may even be some sunshine breaking through, particularly towards the Moray coast and northern parts of Aberdeenshire as well. But as we go through the day, I'm expecting a bit of rain to start to push its way in towards the Outer Hebrides and some blustery winds developing here. Elsewhere, largely dry, one or two showers perhaps, but the general theme will be that there's plenty of sunshine around, especially across England and Wales. And with that, even hotter than today, temperatures rising into the low 30s Celsius towards the southeast and the mid to high 20s across many other areas. Some further wet weather then is going to push its way in across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland as we go into Saturday. Perhaps some of that rain reaching into western parts of England and Wales as well. Further east, it's staying drier, and here we should still have some hot weather for a time, but there is the potential for some thunderstorms to develop on Saturday night. Then Sunday's looking a bit changeable, with things turning cooler by next week.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
£30,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours. It's our biggest cash prize of the year so far, and you could be getting that winning call from us to tell you that you're our next Great British Giveaway winner.
I can't believe this.
Oh my God, this is amazing.
That is absolutely fantastic.
We're over the moon.
I've never won anything like this in my life.
Oh, you shocked me. I never won a penny in my life.
If I was there, I'd buy you a drink.
For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. Are you comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister?
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered.